Welcome back to the IBFP. Here's your host, Foxy New.
Welcome back, fight fans. Welcome back. David Benavidez will destroy Caleb Plant. And let's just break it down. And David Benavidez has recently come out and stated Caleb Plant is overrated and the weakest champ at 168 pounds. He goes on to say, and I quote, Caleb Plant, I think definitely, there's not a lot of overrated I can think of other than Plant. I feel like if you just look at him, he's not the biggest puncher. I feel like he gasses out after 6 rounds. Saunders has a lot of experience. Smith has a lot of experience. They look like they hit harder than Plant. So the weakest champion out of the bunch is Caleb Plant. Now, the interesting thing about this statement from David Benavidez is literally Danny Jacobs, who's recently moved to 168, has said the same thing, has basically come out and stated that he believed that Caleb Plant is the weakest champion at 168 and he's the most beatable champion at 168 pounds. These are two different fighting styles, two different fighters, two different perspectives, and Danny Jacobs has a lot of experience, so that's very telling. After hearing both of these statements, especially Danny Jacobs, I had to take another look at Caleb Plant, because when I saw the fight initially and viewing these two guys, I thought that this was a 50-50 fight. I thought that this fight was very close. I thought because David Benavidez is the bigger, stronger man, he's going to give Caleb Plant all kinds of problems, and I thought Caleb Plant would give him all kinds of problems with his movement, with his defense, with his slick style. And I think, looking at that aesthetically, it makes for an explosive fight. But now I'm leaning more to the destruction of David Benavidez destroying Caleb Plant. And let me tell you why. Because when you look at it, the first 6 rounds, I have those rounds still competitive. I have those rounds still close. So I think the first 6 rounds between, Caleb Plant and David Benavidez is going to be a very good matchup. It's going to be close. I don't think there's going to be extreme separation within the first 6 rounds. I think Caleb Plant's going to be extremely defensive. I think he's going to try to be, hit and move, stick and move. He's going to do everything he can to sway judges in the first 6 rounds, and he will not get destroyed in the first 6 rounds. It's after the first 6 rounds where Caleb Plant will run into trouble, and that's my new thought on this. Basically, after watching film of Caleb Plant, after Danny Jacobs' comments about Caleb Plant being overrated, we had to go back and do film study. And when you look at the film study of Caleb Plant, one thing that you notice, and one of the biggest myths, is that his defense is elite. His defense is not elite. He does have holes, and he has not even faced elite competition. So I'll put it like this. There's a lot of holes and vulnerabilities in Caleb Plant's defense. And the best opponent he's ever faced was Jose Uzcategui, and he took a lot of good shots in that fight. He took a lot of good shots. Imagine if a David Benavidez came in there with a thudding, consistent jab that would keep Caleb Plant honest the whole fight. David Benavidez can pretty much control the tempo, the pace, of the entire fight with the jab. He can pretty much keep him at bay with the jab. He can keep him honest with the jab. David Benavidez is that strong, that big, that long. And then you also notice another myth about Caleb Plant. You see that Jose Uzcategui, it was true that Caleb Plant did gas late in that fight against Jose Uzcategui. He did look tired, and you're not going to see Caleb Plant gassing out at any other fighter getting somewhat visibly tired, because he's fighting guys like a fine butts. He hasn't fought anybody at the top level to make you think that, oh well, this guy presents a significant challenge to tire him out. But when you're facing a guy like Jose Uzcategui and you're getting tired, and Jose Uzcategui, no disrespect, but this guy is a one-dimensional fighter who's looking to land a big shot to get you out of there. And just looking at that alone, you see that Caleb Plant visibly got tired. He was visibly tired. Now, he didn't gas out to the point where he couldn't finish the fight. He didn't gas out to the point where, he had to stop. But he was getting visibly tired and slower. And this was a guy who doesn't hit as hard as David Benavidez. This is a guy who's not going to bring the pressure like a David Benavidez. So imagine when he steps up levels of competition to face a guy like David Benavidez, this is going to be a completely different fight. And then you also have to look at the intangibles of the two fighters. Who's the bigger, who's the taller guy? David Benavidez. Who has the longer reach? David Benavidez. Who has the better level of competition? David Benavidez. You also look at who has the most power. David Benavidez. Who has the best experience? David Benavidez. So all of those intangibles is going to go to David Benavidez. That doesn't mean that Caleb Plant isn't a good fighter. That doesn't mean he doesn't have great instincts. That doesn't mean he doesn't have good skills, because that is true. He does have good skills. He does have good instincts, and he will not be an easy fight for anyone else at 168. Looking at a guy like, Callum Smith, Billy Joe Saunders, I think he can give those guys all kinds of problems as well, even Danny Jacobs. But when I look at a guy like David Benavidez, he's uniquely tailor-made to give Caleb Plant problems. And then you also see, when you look at everything in its totality, I think that David Benavidez will eventually stop Caleb Plant and destroy him probably about the 9th to 10th round. I think that Caleb Plant is going to start to slow down after the 6th with the jab constantly in his face, and he's going to take more and more shots as the fight goes on. Early in the fight, his defense will be slick. I'll even give the early rounds to Caleb Plant. He is a very good, underrated fighter, so I will give that to Caleb Plant. But I think as the fight goes on, wears on, David Benavidez is going to get more aggressive, more confident. And, his power doesn't fade in the fight. If you watch fights of David Benavidez, his power does not fade. It's there consistently throughout the fight. And he's going to keep hitting you with hard shots throughout the fight. And I think that's going to take a toll on him, because at the end of the day, Caleb Plant can be hit. He has been hit by lower tier competition. I don't think that that's going to be something David Benavidez is going to struggle with. And, for any reason that this fight goes to the judges, to a decision, which I don't think it will. I think David Benavidez stops him at this point. You look at the things that the judges are scoring for, and the one thing that you can probably give Caleb Plant early on, if for some miracle it does go to a decision, you can give Caleb Plant defense. That's going to be a scoring criteria that the judge is going to lean on. When they look at a guy like Caleb Plant, they're going to say, okay, his defense was still somewhat tighter than David Benavidez. But at the same time, who are you going to give the effective aggressiveness to? Because, Caleb Plant, for his own sake, he's not going to be aggressive in any manner with David Benavidez. He's going to pretty much look to pot shot. He's going to move around the ring, take one shot here and there, because he cannot get too aggressive. And then even David Benavidez's jab will not allow it. The effectiveness, aggressiveness has to go to David Benavidez. The ring generalship will have to go to David Benavidez. The harder, cleaner shots has to go to David Benavidez. He's a stronger guy, and when he hits Caleb Plant, he has the ability to pop his head back. We've seen Jose Uzcategui pop his head back. We don't even want to see what David Benavidez is going to do to Caleb Plant. I don't see this going to a decision, but if it does, I got, David Benavidez by a unanimous decision. I simply think that David Benavidez will eventually stop and destroy Caleb Plant, but that doesn't mean Plant isn't a good fighter. That doesn't mean it won't be close to the first 6 rounds, and that doesn't mean that Caleb Plant is overrated. I think he's an underrated fighter. I think he's very talented, but I think the way this fight is built and set up, David Benavidez is all wrong for Caleb Sweet Hands Plant. But once again, Unbiased as always is the IBFP.